Richard Ashford laid a single sheet of paper on the marble dining table and slid it toward his daughter without a word. 5 names, 5 fortunes, 5 men he had already chosen for her. By Friday, he said. Or, Brendan takes the company. Sienna did not pick up the list. She walked out of the dining hall, down the long staircase, past the wine cellar, and stopped at the door of the boiler room. A black man in a gray jacket was kneeling beside the old furnace, one hand dark with grease, the other steady on a wrench. He did not look up when she entered. Sienna stayed at the threshold longer than she meant to, watching the stranger work. He did not hum. He did not curse. He did not check his phone. He simply listened to the furnace the way a doctor listens to a chest, tilting his head slightly, letting the metal speak before he moved. "It's been making a sound," Sienna said from the doorway. "I know," he answered without turning. His voice was low, accustomed to silence the way old wood is accustomed to wait. "The pressure valve is fine. Your relief line is iced over. Whoever ran the last service skipped the bleed cycle. I'll fix it tonight." Sienna stepped inside. She had grown up in this house. No one had ever told her something about her own home in a tone that flat, that certain. The contractors who came through these halls always opened with a wince and a number, with the polite calculation of men already planning to overcharge her. This man had not even glanced at her shoes. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan." "Ethan what?" "Carter." He still did not turn. He reached for a smaller tool, set it down, chose another. The way his hand moved over the brass fitting was not the way a maintenance man moved. It was slower, quieter, as if the metal were a living thing that needed to be coaxed. "You don't ask who I am," she said. "You came down to a basement at 7 in the evening in a cashmere coat. I assume you live here. Most people guess my last name. I don't guess. I fix things." She almost laughed. Instead, she watched him reseat the line, feel for the pressure with 2 fingers, and listen again. The furnace settled. A long, low exhale, like a tired animal finding rest. "Done," he said. He stood, knees stiff. He folded his rag, slid each tool back into its scarred metal box, and latched it with care. On the small workbench beside him sat a child's lunch tin, painted with a faded rabbit, and a folded sheet of construction paper, crayon lines, a house, a sun, 2 stick figures holding hands. Sienna saw the drawing. She did not ask. He picked up the lunch tin and the drawing, and slid both into his jacket pocket, with the same quiet care he had given the brass fittings. He took a small notebook from his back pocket, wrote 3 lines in pencil, tore the page free, and left it on the bench beside the furnace. Notes for whoever came after him. A figure passed in the hallway behind her. Margaret Pierce, the housekeeper for 31 years, paused at the doorway. Her eyes met Ethan's for less than a second. She did not greet him. She did not nod. She turned and walked on. Sienna watched the woman go. "Margaret knows you," she said. "A lot of people know a maintenance guy." She didn't say hello. She doesn't have to. He stepped past her toward the door, careful not to brush her sleeve. At the threshold, he paused. "The valve will hold for another winter. After that, replace the unit. The whole unit. Don't let them just patch it again." "Why are you telling me?" "Because nobody else will." He left. She heard his boots on the stone steps, even and unhurried, until the side door closed behind him. Sienna stood in the warm, ticking silence of the boiler room. The list was still in her hand. She looked down at the 5 names her father had chosen. She did not see any of them. She caught him in the service corridor the next evening, just before he left. The hallway smelled faintly of wet wool and old plaster. His toolbox was already in his hand, and his jacket was zipped to the collar against the cold that had settled over the estate grounds since sundown. "Mr. Carter." A word. He stopped. He did not sigh. He simply waited, the way a man waits who has learned that standing still costs nothing. "I have a proposal," she said. She had rehearsed it in the car on the way over, running the numbers the way she ran every negotiation, with the assumption that every man had a price, and the only question was whether she had found it. "It's not personal. It's a contract. 6 months. We marry on paper. You appear at 3 corporate events. $200,000 in your account when we sign. Full college tuition for your daughter, paid into a trust she cannot touch until she turns 18. She said it cleanly. She said it the way she said everything in boardrooms, with clarity and control and the quiet confidence of a woman who had never been turned down when the numbers were right. His expression did not move, not a flicker, not a shift. He looked at her the way he had looked at the furnace, as if he were listening for the part that was broken. "Margaret told you about my daughter," he said. "I asked. She didn't volunteer. You ask a stranger about a child. I asked a woman I've known my whole life about a man I'm considering marrying." He looked at her then. Really looked. The corridor was bare and bright, the overhead fluorescent, casting a light that hid nothing. And she felt for the first time in her adult life that someone was reading her clearly. Not her name, not her shoes, not the company she carried behind her like a shadow, but the woman standing in front of him with a contract in her voice and something less certain in her eyes. "No, you haven't heard the terms. I heard enough. The answer is no. Mr. Carter, my daughter is not a line in your contract. Her future is not a chip you put on the table to win a board seat. I don't care how much money you have. You don't get to buy her tuition by renting her father." He did not raise his voice. That was what struck her. He said it the way he had spoken to the furnace, with the steady certainty of a man who understood pressure and knew exactly when to release it. His eyes held hers for a beat longer than necessary, and in them she saw something she had not expected. Not anger, not contempt, but a kind of sorrow for the fact that she had thought this would work. "Good night, Miss Ashford." He walked away. He did not slam the door behind him. He closed it the way he closed every door, with the quiet assurance of a man who had already decided not to come back. Sienna stood alone in the corridor. She had been refused before, of course, by markets, by weather, by her father in small and careful ways. But she had never been refused by a person who simply did not need what she was offering. Every man she had ever negotiated with had wanted something. Land, access. Her name, the stranger in the gray jacket, had not wanted any of it. She did not feel insulted. She felt curious. And curiosity in Sienna Ashford's life had always been more dangerous than anger. That night, close to 11, her phone rang. It was Margaret. Margaret never called. In 31 years, Margaret had never once called Sienna's personal line. Sienna answered before the second ring. "There's been an emergency," the older woman said. Her voice was flat, the way it got when the information was too heavy for inflection. "Mr. Carter's daughter. An allergic reaction. They took her to Mass General." "Why are you telling me?" "Because you should know." Sienna was in her car before she finished pulling on her coat. She did not stop to ask herself why. The streets were wet. The harbor lights smeared across her windshield in long ribbons of gold and white. She drove faster than she should have and did not slow until she saw the red sign of the emergency entrance. The hospital corridor was the white of bone. Ethan was already there, standing at the nurse's station, both hands flat on the counter, as if the counter were the only thing holding him upright. His jacket was unzipped. His shirt was untucked. He had come the way fathers come when the phone rings at the wrong hour, without thought, without preparation, with nothing but velocity and fear. He turned. He saw her. His face went through 3 things in 1 second, and none of them were welcome. "What are you doing here? I came to apologize for earlier. Now is not I'm not staying. I just wanted you to know I heard what you said." A nurse leaned over the desk. "Mr. Carter, she's stable. You can sit with her in 10 minutes. The word stable went through him visibly. His shoulders dropped half an inch. He let go of the counter. Sienna sat down in a plastic chair against the wall and folded her hands in her lap. She did not leave. They sat through the long hours together, 2 strangers separated by 4 empty seats. He did not speak. She did not push. A janitor mopped the corridor at 3 in the morning. The ceiling lights buzzed on a frequency that lived just below thought. At 4:15, a nurse beckoned. Ethan went in. Sienna stayed where she was. She was not invited. 20 minutes later, the nurse came back. "He's asking if you'd come in." Sienna stood. The room was small. A child lay in the bed, very small under the white sheet, with an IV taped to the back of one little hand. Ethan sat on the edge of the mattress, holding the other hand, the way a man holds something he has already lost once. The girl's eyes opened. They were a clear, tired brown. She looked at Sienna for a long moment. "You have hair like a fairy," the child whispered. Sienna laughed. It came out before she could stop it, rough and surprised, as if her own throat had forgotten how. She had not laughed in 7 weeks. She had not noticed until now. "What's your name?" she asked. "Hazel." "That's pretty. My middle name's Rose." "That's a flower." "It is." Hazel smiled, a small, weak smile, and closed her eyes again. Ethan did not look at Sienna. He was looking at his daughter. His thumb moved very slowly across the back of her hand. Once, twice, as if to be sure the hand was warm. Sienna sat in the chair by the window. There was a thin paperback on the side table, a book of bedtime stories someone had left behind. She picked it up and read aloud softly. It's a story about a fox who lived under a bridge and waited every night for the moon to come down and sit beside him. Hazel slept. Ethan listened and did not interrupt. The rain outside the hospital window thinned, then stopped, and the first pale edge of morning appeared behind the parking garage across the street. When the nurse came at 6 to check the IV, Ethan walked Sienna into the corridor. The hospital was beginning to wake. Carts rattled. A coffee machine in the family lounge sputtered to life. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed with the mechanical patience of a building that had seen every kind of grief and was no longer moved by any of it. They stood near the elevator bank. He had not slept. She had not slept. The difference was that he wore sleeplessness like a garment he had owned for years, fitted and familiar, and she wore it like something borrowed that did not quite sit right on her shoulders. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reading, for not asking questions." She looked at him. His face in the hospital light was older than she had thought. Not old. Used, worn in the way that good leather wears, from pressure applied in the same places over and over again. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there 3 years ago. She did not know that, but she sensed it. The way a person senses that a house has been through a storm even after the roof has been repaired. "I'm not going to make the offer again," she said. "Not the one I made yesterday." He waited. He did not cross his arms. He did not lean against the wall. He stood the way he always stood, upright and still, as if stillness were a language he had learned in place of argument. "I'm going to make a different one. Give me a real reason, not a contract, something I can say to my father with my own voice. Tell me in front of him that you're someone in my life. 1 month. After that, if it doesn't work, we end it cleanly. No money, no trust, no paper at all. Why would I agree to that? Because you already know how this story ends if I lose. The man my father wants me to marry is the man who ran your old industry into the ground. I can't stop him from inside my own boardroom anymore. I need someone he can't dismiss. He'll dismiss me in 5 seconds. He won't. Trust me. He'll be too busy underestimating you." A long silence passed between them. A nurse walked by, pushing an empty wheelchair. The elevator arrived, opened, and closed again with no one inside it. Down the hall, a father carried a sleeping toddler against his shoulder, one hand on the child's back, his steps slow and careful, as if the floor itself might wake her. Ethan watched the man pass. Something crossed his face that was not quite recognition, but something close to it, the look of a man seeing his own life reflected in a stranger's posture. Ethan looked through the small glass window at his sleeping daughter. The machine beside her bed ticked steadily. The IV dripped. The child's hand was still curled around the place where his thumb had been. Her mouth was slightly open, the way children sleep when they have finally stopped being afraid. He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. Once, with the small, decisive motion of a man who had weighed a thing and found it worth the risk. Not for himself, but for the person on the other side of the glass. Friday came faster than either of them expected. Ethan arrived at the Ashford estate in a dark suit, 10 years out of fashion. The jacket had been pressed that afternoon, the creases sharp, the effort visible. His shoes were shined. He held Hazel's hand in his own, and Hazel wore a navy dress with a small white collar and looked up at the house like she had wandered into a museum. Richard met them in the front hall. His eyes went over Ethan the way a jeweler's eyes go over a stone he has already decided to reject. From collar to cuffs, to scuffed shoe leather, lingering one beat too long on the skin. His mouth did not move, but a small muscle in his jaw did. He did not bend down to greet Hazel. He did not acknowledge her at all. Hazel looked at the tall man, then looked at her father, then said very politely, "Hello." Richard offered no answer. Sienna came down the stairs. She did not take Ethan's arm. She stopped at his shoulder, half a step back, and let him stand on his own. Brendan Locke was already in the dining room. He was 44, broad in the chest, with the easy smile of a man who had never been told no. He stood when they entered. He held out his hand to Ethan with a grip that pressed harder than it needed to. Brendan Locke, Chief Operating Officer, family friend, Ethan Carter. "And what is it you do, Ethan?" The first name came out smooth and quick, the way men use first names to make a stranger smaller. "Building maintenance. Hourly? Salaried? Through a contractor? How much? If you don't mind." The table went very still. No one at a dinner table asks another man his salary. It is a rule so basic it does not need to be spoken, except when the man being asked is the kind of man another man believes does not deserve the rule. Ethan answered, without flinching, $42,000 a year, plus health insurance for my daughter. Brendan let out a small, kind, terrible laugh. "Well," he said, "that's honest." Dinner was served. Hazel sat between her father and Sienna. She used her fork carefully. She said please and thank you to the server. She did not stare at the chandelier, though her eyes went to it twice. Ethan reached over once, without looking, and adjusted the napkin on her lap. He did it the way other men check their watches, without thought, by habit, by a kind of gravity that pulled him always toward the child beside him. Halfway through the second course, Hazel reached for her glass of grape juice, and her elbow caught the rim. Purple bloomed across the white linen, ran along the edge, and dripped onto Brendan's pale gray sleeve. Brendan stood up fast. His chair scraped the marble floor. "For God's sake, I'm sorry," Hazel whispered. Her face went red. Her chin trembled. Ethan was already on one knee beside her chair. He lifted the hem of her sleeve clear of the spill. He took the cloth napkin from his own lap, folded it once, and pressed it gently to the small circle of juice on her wrist where it had splashed. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's just juice. It's okay." His voice did not shake. He did not look at Brendan. He did not look at Richard. He looked at his daughter. Brendan was still standing. "That sleeve is custom made. It's a sleeve." Sienna said it, the way her father said most things, level and final, and she was looking directly at her own father when she said it. Richard set down his glass. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the man on one knee beside the child. He looked, for one long second, at Brendan, who was still on his feet with a napkin pressed to a stain that did not actually exist anymore. "Mr. Carter," Richard said, "1 month, you prove to me that there is something in you worth my daughter's name, or you walk out of this house and you do not come back. Are we clear?" "Yes." "Sit." He lifted his glass. To clarity. Nobody else lifted theirs. Sienna packed 2 suitcases the next morning. By that evening, she was carrying them up a narrow wooden staircase above a bakery on Hanover Street. The apartment had 2 small bedrooms, one window over the alley, one window over the street, and a kitchen the size of her old walk-in closet. The whole place smelled, faintly and constantly, of warm bread. Hazel showed her the bathroom, the light pool, the trick to the hot water tap, the cabinet where the Band-Aids lived. She was very serious about the Band-Aids. "Daddy says you have to be ready," Hazel told her, lining up 3 boxes by size. "You don't know when somebody's going to scrape a knee. That seems wise." It is. That first night, Sienna stood at the sink and washed 3 plates, 2 forks, and a small saucepan. She had never washed a dish in her life. She watched her own hands move under the warm water with something close to wonder. The soap was lemon-scented. The dish towel was thin and plain, and had been folded 1,000 times. Ethan made dinner. Pasta with butter and garlic and a lemon he zested over the top, with a small grater. 3 plates, 1 yellow lamp over the table. Hazel between them. They did not talk much. Hazel hummed. Ethan refilled water. Sienna ate slowly and felt, for reasons she could not name, that she was being given something she had not earned. After dinner, Hazel pulled out a tin of crayons and laid a sheet of paper between them. "You draw the sky," she instructed Sienna. "I'll do the people. I can't draw. Everyone can draw a sky. Just blue at the top and white in the middle and pink at the bottom for sunset." Sienna picked up a blue crayon. Her hand was unsteady. She drew a clumsy stripe across the top of the page. Hazel nodded, satisfied. "Now the white," Hazel said. "Press soft. That's the rule." "I didn't know there were rules." "There are always rules. Daddy says so." Ethan lifted an eyebrow at the sink and did not turn around. Sienna pressed soft. The white blended into the blue and became something almost sky-shaped. Hazel put her own hand over Sienna's for a moment, guided it to the right place on the page, and let go. It was the smallest gesture. Sienna did not move for a full breath afterward. Later, after Hazel was in bed, Ethan sat at the table with a mug of tea he had not touched. Sienna stood at the kitchen doorway. The apartment was quiet. In a way her house had never been quiet. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of things in their right place, of a child breathing down the hall, of a man who had learned to live inside small rooms without shrinking. She said good night. He nodded, without looking up. She went to find a spare blanket. The hall closet was deep and old. On the top shelf, behind a stack of folded towels, her fingers brushed a metal box. She took it down. It was an engineer's filing case, dented, the latch worn smooth. She opened it on the floor of the hallway. The name on every cover page was the same. E. Carter, Principal Engineer, Geothermal Systems. The most recent date was 3 years and 4 months ago. She turned the pages slowly, carefully, the way a person handles evidence they know they were not meant to find. Thermal recovery data, pilot site coordinates, cost projections that showed a technology not only viable, but cheaper than what it was meant to replace. She did not understand all of it. She understood enough. The man asleep in the next room was not, and had never been a maintenance worker. He was an engineer who had built something that worked, and then, for reasons she did not yet know, had walked away from it and picked up a wrench instead. She put the box back exactly as she had found it. She straightened the towels. She went to bed. She did not say a word. She found Margaret in the kitchen, at the estate, 3 days later. On a morning Ethan had taken Hazel to school. "Tell me about him." Margaret did not pretend to misunderstand. She set down the tea towel and folded it once. The way she folded everything, with a precision that left no loose ends. "He worked for your father. For all of us. He led the geothermal project, the big one, the one that was supposed to take Ashford Holdings off oil money for good. And it was killed 3 years ago. Officially, the test results came back inconclusive. The board pulled the funding. Mr. Carter resigned the same week. And his wife?" Margaret looked at the window for a long moment. The gardener was raking the front lawn in long, slow rows. The sound of it came in through the glass, even and indifferent. She was driving home from the closure meeting. She'd come to pick him up. There was a truck. It was raining. It was a Tuesday. She paused. He carried Hazel out of the car himself. The girl was 4. Sienna sat down on a kitchen stool. She had not asked permission. Margaret poured her tea anyway. "Why did the project get killed? That isn't my place to say." Margaret, the older woman, sighed. She walked to a drawer at the end of the counter, the one she had kept her own things in since Sienna was 9. She pulled out a folded paper, soft at the edges from years of being held and put away again. The cancellation order, the signature page. She placed it on the counter between them. The executive sponsor's signature was not Richard Ashford's. It was Brendan Locke's. Sienna stared at it. Her fingers were cold around the cup. Outside, the gardener had moved to the side beds. The rake made a different sound on gravel than it did on grass. Sharper, more deliberate. "Does my father know?" "Your father signs 40 papers a day." He trusted Brendan with the technical files. He did not read the appendix. Margaret sat down across from her. Her hands were folded on the table the way they always were when she had something to say that she had been carrying too long. There is something else you should understand. When the project was killed, Mr. Carter was the only black engineer at project lead level in this company. His termination file reads, "Released for cause, system level failure." Any other engineer at that level would have received restructured. The internal evaluation, Mr. Locke wrote, used the phrase, "unreliable judgment." Those are not words anyone uses for a man who holds federal patents. Why didn't he say anything? Margaret set down her cup, because he knew how it would look. A black engineer, the only one at that level, raising a complaint after a project cancellation. He knew exactly what they would call it. He knew the word they would use without saying it. Playing the card, so he stayed quiet. He packed his office in a single box. He took his daughter home. He found contract work through a service list, the kind of list they give to men who used to build systems and now fix the pipes those systems run through. He never once said the word unfair. He said the project was over. He said the only thing that mattered now was the child. He asked me to keep his name out of this house. I have, until tonight. The kitchen was quiet for a long time. Margaret stood and began to clear the tea things, not because they needed clearing, but because she was a woman who had spent 31 years in this house and had learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who has just received difficult information is to give them a reason not to speak. Sienna folded the paper very carefully and put it in her pocket. That night, she sat across from Ethan at the small kitchen table. Hazel was asleep. The bakery downstairs had closed 2 hours ago, and the building had gone soft and dark around them. The only light came from the lamp over the stove, a warm yellow circle that reached the table, but not the corners. "I know," she said. He understood at once. He did not pretend. "How much?" "Most of it. The project. Your wife." He looked at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had rebuilt himself from the ground up, literally, wrench by wrench, furnace by furnace, until the work was small enough to carry without breaking. "I buried it," he said, "on purpose. I don't want it back. I want to raise my daughter and fix furnaces and sleep at night. I am not going back into that building. I'm not asking you to." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because you should know who signed it." She put the folded paper on the table. He read the name. He did not move for a long time. His hand on the table closed slowly, then opened again, deliberately, as if he had decided not to make a fist tonight, not because he could not, but because there was a child sleeping 20 feet away, and the man he had become in the last 3 years did not make fists in the same house where his daughter dreamed. "She used to draw on my drafts," he said very quietly. His voice had gone somewhere far away, to a place where the paper still smelled like pencil lead, and the margins held small stick figures and hearts, and the initial K in a hand that would never write again. "Whenever I brought work home," she said, the engineering was lonely without something soft on it. Sienna did not speak. She sat with him in the silence, the way she had sat with him in the hospital, without pushing, without asking, with the simple act of remaining. She understood now that this was the thing he needed most and received least, a person who could sit in the dark without reaching for the light switch. He looked up at her. His eyes were wet, and he did not hide it. He reached across the table and took her hand. Not held. Took. The way a man takes hold of something he has decided to keep. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Her phone rang. "Margaret, listen to me carefully," the older woman said. "He's hired someone, a private investigator. He's asking about Hazel, about her school, about her route home. Sienna, you need to get ahead of this tonight." Sienna set the phone down. Ethan was already standing. His face had changed. The quiet that had been in him a moment before was still there, but it had hardened around the edges. It was no longer the quiet of a man who had given up. It was the quiet of a man who had remembered what he was capable of, and had decided, very deliberately, to stand up. "The summit is Friday," she said. "I know. Will you come with me?" Yes. The Boston Harbor Hotel ballroom held 400 investors that Friday night. Crystal, cold light. A long stage, a row of cameras at the back. The ice sculptures on the rear table had been carved into the Ashford monogram and were already, very slowly, beginning to weep. Richard Ashford stood at the lectern in his Navy suit. Brendan stood 3 feet to his right, smiling the smile of a man who had already won. "Good evening," Richard began. "Tonight, Ashford Holdings announces—" "Excuse me, Father." Sienna walked up the side stairs. Ethan walked behind her in the same dark suit he had worn to dinner a month earlier, carrying a slim leather folio. The ballroom went quiet. "I'd like 5 minutes," Sienna said, "before you announce anything." Richard looked at her. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the 400 faces watching in the cameras, and at Brendan, whose smile had not moved but whose hand on the lectern edge had gone white. Richard stepped back from the microphone. 5 minutes. Sienna took the lectern. The screen behind her changed. The original test data came up side by side with the falsified set, the email metadata, the transfer dates, the shell account, the $16 million. She did not raise her voice. "This is the report that was killed 3 years ago. This is the report that was filed in its place. The signature on the cancellation order belongs to one man in this company. He is standing on this stage. He is also the man who, this week, hired a private investigator to follow a 7-year-old child to her elementary school. I would like that on the record as well." A murmur went through the room. A camera flashed. Ethan stepped forward. He set the folio on the lectern. He did not read from it. "My name is Ethan Carter. I led the geothermal program at Ashford Holdings between 2019 and 2022. The pilot system in western Massachusetts produced 5.7 megawatts of baseload energy at a cost ratio of 0.8 to 1 to natural gas. The technology works. It worked then. It works now. I am not here to accuse anyone of anything. I am here so that the record reflects what the engineers in that building actually built." He paused. He looked at the 3rd row of the ballroom, where 2 of his old engineers, who had also been let go that same month 3 years ago, were sitting in borrowed suits. "Most of those engineers are not in this room tonight," Ethan said. "Some of them never worked again. Not because they weren't good enough, because their termination files were written in the kind of language people write when they want to make sure someone never gets called back. The kind of language that doesn't say what it means, but means exactly what it says. I would like their names on the record too. They are in the folio on this lectern." He stepped back from the microphone. The silence in the room was the silence of 400 people understanding, all at once, that the man Brendan had spent 10 minutes calling a failed engineer had just spoken about a power plant, the way a surgeon speaks about a heart. Richard Ashford stood. He walked to the front of the stage. He took the microphone. 3 years ago, I signed a project cancellation order that I did not read in full. I trusted the man who handed it to me. I should not have. Mr. Locke is no longer employed by this company. Effective tonight. The Westcott merger will not proceed." He turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of Ashford Holdings, I owe you an apology. Not because my daughter brought you here, because I should have read the file." The ballroom began, slowly, to applaud. It started in the 3rd row, where the 2 old engineers sat. It moved in waves. By the time it reached the back of the room, several investors were on their feet. Hotel security came up the side aisle for Brendan. He did not resist. He walked out with his hands at his sides and his face very still. Sienna turned to Ethan. She did not embrace him. She simply lifted her hand and touched his shoulder. Once. It was enough. 6 weeks later, the bakery on Hanover Street opened at 6. By 1:15, the smell of yeast and butter was climbing the stairs. Ethan stood at the stove in a clean white t-shirt, scrambling eggs. Sienna sat on a stool at the counter in one of his old flannels, her hair loose, a printout of a thermal plant siting study in front of her. Hazel was at the table with her crayons, working seriously on something she would not let either of them see. Ethan was not on the Ashford payroll. He had filed papers 2 weeks earlier for Carter Geothermal Systems LLC, with offices in a converted warehouse in Somerville and a staff of 9. 6 of them had been with him at Ashford and had been waiting, in their various small lives, for someone to call them back. Ashford Holdings was one of his contracts. So were 2 utilities in Vermont and a research consortium at MIT. He answered to no one. The doorbell rang at 7. Richard Ashford stood on the landing in a long wool coat, holding a small paper bag from the bakery downstairs and a wrapped box. "May I come in?" Sienna stepped back from the door. Richard sat down at the small kitchen table, where he had never sat before. He set the bag on the table. He held the wrapped box on his knees for a moment, as if uncertain. Then he held it out to Hazel. "I was told you like to draw." Hazel opened it carefully. A new tin of crayons. 64 colors. Her eyes went very round. "There's gold." "There is." She climbed down from her chair and walked to him. She did not ask. She simply leaned against his knee the way children do when they have decided. Richard looked down at the small head against his leg. He set one large hand very gently on her back. He had not held a child since Sienna was 6. "Will you show me the picture?" he asked. She climbed into his lap and laid the drawing across his knees. 4 people, a mother and a father and a child, and an older man with white hair, holding hands in a row. Richard looked at it for a long time. He did not speak. He took out a clean handkerchief and pretended to clean his glasses. Later, after Hazel had gone to her room to color the new gold, Ethan and Sienna stood at the window over Hanover Street. The morning light came in flat and pale across the brick. Ethan reached into his pocket. He set a small box on the windowsill between them. He did not open it. "It isn't to finish anything," he said. "It's to begin something. With you. With her. With whatever comes next. No paper. No contract. Just a question." Sienna looked at the box. She looked at him. She did not answer with words. She lifted her hand and placed it over his on the windowsill and left it there. Behind them, at the kitchen table, Hazel was bent over her drawing. She added a 4th figure. Then, after a moment of thought, she added a 5th, smaller, 4-legged, a tail, 2 ears. She looked up at the 2 adults at the window. Then she looked at her grandfather, who was still sitting at the table with the bakery bag he had not unpacked, watching the morning light move across the brick of the building across the street. She added a 6th figure on the page, smaller still, old, with white hair. She smiled and kept drawing.